Welcome to Venture with Joe and Cody, where we take a deep dive into the minds of leaders and innovators making a real impact today. I'm Joe.
And I'm Cody. And we're here to bring you the raw stories, the successes, and the setbacks that these trailblazers have experienced in their journey to where they are today.
Every week, we sit down with a new guest who's ready to share their insight and advice on business, entrepreneurship, and making a difference in their community. From local community members to industry experts, you're going to get the unfiltered truth behind their success.
So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned professional, or just curious about the business world, join us for a journey of learning and inspiration.
So let's grab a drink, settle in, and let's get started. This is Venture with Joe and Cody. Skipper. I'm the owner of Skipper Realty Group, brokered by eXp Realty. I'm with my buddy Cody Wilhelm with Residential Mortgage. How are you, Cody?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
Good. Well, I'm good. I'm just super excited about this podcast. I have not only my good friend, but probably the highest profile individual we've had on this program, the Marion County District Attorney, Paige Clarkson. Paige, how are you?
Thank you. I'm worried that says more about me than it does about you, but okay, there we go.
You lowered the bar to come talk to us, and I appreciate it. I know that you have a busy schedule.
You have dirt on me, so I always have to show up where you ask.
Exactly. I don't use it often. I don't play that card often, but I did to get you on the show.
Occasionally, there's, yeah.
You got to do what you got to do.
Well, it's going to be good to talk to you, Paige. First off, it's just... it's fun to talk to you. You're a good speaker. You're a great public speaker, and you have been for years. But also, the story that you have been through and all the stuff that you've been through to get to the DA's office and what that's like is pretty cool. And now I was doing a little bit of, don't act shocked by this. I was doing a little bit of research into kind of where we want to go with this podcast. And this podcast, I already know from right now where it's going to go.
Started rough. Yeah.
But more of I came from this industry, the police industry, so I know a lot about it. But I think that we need to dumb it down to the basic level of kind of tell us what the district attorney is, what your responsibilities are, and kind of what you cover in the aspect of the legal realm.
Sure. So, there's a real official answer to that, and then there's some unofficial answers to that. But in general, in Oregon, the district attorney there's 36 of us. We're divided by 36 counties. So there's only 36 elected district attorneys across the state. I represent Marion County, which is the county seat is Salem, also happens to be the capital of Oregon, and then a bunch of other communities within Marion County. So there's 35 other counterparts like me in the state. We're elected for 4-year terms, and we are the top law enforcement official in any jurisdiction in the county. So by statute, I know people think it's the sheriff because he has a gun and a badge, and that would make sense. But by statute, it's actually the district attorney that represents law enforcement in a county. So if anybody watches Law and Order, there's the police who prosecute or who investigate offenses and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. And
that was like verbatim. What you just did. You obviously watched Law and Order because that was exactly what they said.
I did when I was in high school. I haven't watched. I'm an OG Law and Order person, the original. Sure. I have not watched it as a grown up since I've had this job. But yes, that is what we do. So our job is once the police investigate crime, they send it all to us and hopefully a nice little package and police reports. And in a very simplistic, dumbed down version, we decide what to prosecute and what crimes. And if we can prove them beyond a reasonable doubt, and we charge them in court, and we do all the in-court litigation. And so everything from criminal trespass to murder. So all of that. In Marion County, we review about 10,000 different crime, different investigations every year. So we're a big county and not big like Multnomah, but we're kind of the top 4 in Oregon. So in Oregon, it's not County Multnomah, but there's Clackamas, Washington, Lane, and Marion are kind of the next top largest counties. So we're right in there with that.
So you're almost varsity level, but you're just under. Yeah.
If you consider Multnomah varsity level, then yes.
I know you have to be careful in this podcast.
My counterparts in Washington County and Clackamas and Lane I think they're all pretty varsity level. So.
Well, that's cool. How did you get, because there's multiple paths to go with law, and kind of where did you decide that you're going that path versus civil defense, whatever else there is?
Obviously you got to go to law school. I went to law school a very long time ago. I've been at this gig for 25 years. So I like to say a quarter of a century, which makes it sound like I just stepped off the Titanic. And which some days I feel like that. I've been a lawyer in Marion County for 25 years. And then I was a law clerk before that. So you got to go to law school to be any kind of a lawyer. But when I hit law school, I knew that I had an interest in criminal law. I knew I liked that stuff. I knew I was not built to be a defense lawyer, unlike Mr. Skipper. I think if he went to law school, he would be a defense attorney, which is why we fought constantly when he was a detective. But I knew I didn't want to be a defense attorney. I think you kind of come maybe with something, like you come on kind of one side of the spectrum or the other, and definitely more of a law and order girl. I'm a rule follower. Again, unlike Joe, which is what we used to fight about when he was a detective. I follow the rules, and definitely a rule follower. So made sense that criminal law was the most interesting. It's kind of grungy. And we call it trench lawyering, right? So we really are kind of in the trenches. And it's a lot of litigation, a lot of in-court work, which I was really attracted to. So, but for the most part, if I'm being honest, I went to law school, got into law school, looked around and was like, oh my gosh, who are these weirdos that I'm in law school? It's like, lawyers were like really not my jam. And I love a lot of lawyers. I boss around a lot of lawyers now, and they're some of my best friends, but in general, the vast world or array of lawyers can, I thought they were kind of weirdos. I thought when I went to law school, people would be like me. And then I realized that the people that are like me are prosecutors, like they're criminal lawyers and they're prosecutors. And so when I got a job at the Marion County DA's office over 25 years ago now as a law clerk, it just was a fit. I walked in, I was like, these are my people. Mm-hmm. This is why I went to law school. And you just kind of find your fit. And I was really fortunate to find it second year of law school really early on. And I never left, and I don't like change. So that's part of it. I've been here for a really long time. And so it was just a good fit. Good fit for my personality, good fit for what I like. And my life, normally my growing up life, I have no law enforcement in my family, no military in my family. So it was not anything that I grew up doing. Joe knows this, a lot of people in law enforcement, their grandfather was a cop, their dad was a cop, like it's this sort of generational thing. I don't come from that. I come from a very normal, upbringing, and I kind of got into this and loved it. Loved how dirty it can be. Like I get to know all the dirty stuff without actually being in the dirt. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Do you have any siblings? Are you, where are you at in the chronological order of your family tree? Because I'm always curious.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of 7.
I was wondering, rule followers tend to be the oldest one.
Yes, 100%. And my youngest siblings will tell you that. So I'm the oldest of 7. I have 5 brothers and 1 sister.
Oh, wow.
And I'm the oldest, and my sister is the baby. And we grew up in completely different households. In my household, I had to be home on time, follow the rules, do the curfew and use the car and pay the gas and do all the things. By the time my mom got to my sister, she was just happy. She was home alive. She didn't care. Didn't know where she was. We grew up in totally different houses. We talk about that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I grew up with 5 annoying younger brothers. My sister grew up with 5 older brothers and their hot friends. Yeah. So we grew up in completely different houses.
Yeah.
Same family, same parents, same recipe, all the same things, totally different upbringing. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so funny because what you talk about the rule follower and things. Is that what got you into law? Like what, and not only law, but what made you not go? I think I know the answer to this, but why didn't you go the cop route versus, I know. What made you say law is where I need to go?
Because I don't want. Nobody wants me shooting a gun. Nobody wants that.
I think I knew the answer, but I just wanted you to say it.
I don't want to dig in anybody's pockets. That's a cop thing. You have to pull out drugs and gross things and needle. I don't want to do any of that. I like a good ride along, but if it's too gross or too dangerous, I'll stay in the car. I have a limit, I have a line. I'm also really dangerous on a ride along now. Like I know enough to be dangerous. Yeah, exactly. Insert myself when I shouldn't, and I should just stay in the car. But yeah, knew I didn't want to be a cop. I don't want to run the ORPAT. That's the test you have to run to like be a cop. I don't want to do that. I don't like pain. Like I don't want to fight. I don't want to do any of those things. I just want to like watch people do that and like talk about it later. But I love all the good stories. I grew up with 5 brothers. Like I grew up like I like the stories, the funny, I have a sign in my office that's behind me somewhere that says, bad decisions make good stories. And that is 100% what being in law enforcement is. It's just bad decision after bad decision that you get to read about. And then we have good stories. And the best places to be are, with a bunch of cops, with a bunch of other prosecutors telling stories over, beers at a happy hour. Like that's the payoff of this gig. And it's funny stuff, and you don't experience this anywhere else. I always tell people that we have a lot of lawyers that come here and they'll leave thinking they want to go make more money elsewhere, because you can. Civil lawyers make more money in general than government lawyers do, drive fancier cars, have bigger houses. But once you've stood over a dead body and you're kind of in that investigation, it's hard. It's hard to leave it. I don't know how Skipper did it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave it. I missed it too much. It's fun. Now, what I do now is none of those things. Now I'm just an administrator and I boss people around. But for years, that was the payoff, right? It is like a TV show. They don't make TV shows about contract lawyers or real estate transactions.
Okay. Let's slow down. Slow your roll. TV. Okay, come on.
Yeah. Not to make fun of what you do, but it's cooler on this side.
The jabs that have been coming through at this podcast are, I've noticed them and I'm documenting them just so you're aware.
I know.
Don't think it just slides by, Paige.
I think you're just supposed to ask questions. I don't think you're supposed to comment.
Just read
this is the story of Paige and I in our old former career.
100%.
Paige attempting to boss me around.
I have such good Joe Skipper stories. It's ridiculous.
Well, you can go over them if you want. I was going to ask you, like, I want to, like, we got through the nitty gritty of how you got there, but now it's like what first is like, I always get asked this, and I should have wrote a journal when I was in police work. And I think if you haven't, you probably think the same thing. It's like, I should have documented what I did, because by the time that your career's over, everyone's like, what's your coolest story, or what's your most fun story, or what's the most crazy story? And you're like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea what happened. But when you get going with someone, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that one. So I'm going to put you on the spot and say, like, what is like one of the most, I guess, impactful ones, I guess.
Well, so here's the deal. Like, most of what we do, people don't want those stories. Like, right? Like, most of what we do, you don't want to hear those stories at a cocktail party. Like, most people don't want to hear about murder cases, even though they think they do. Most people don't want to hear about child sexual abuse. Like, they don't want to know that exists. Most people do not want to see what my lawyers see every day, or what I see. Most people don't want to know what an actual detective does every day. Like, they only want like those good stories. So I think what a lot of us that have done this job for a really long time, we have to have like some story that we tell that's appropriate
to go to
at a cocktail party. And I've been at it so long that I don't even remember my appropriate ones anymore. All my stories are inappropriate. And especially kind of in, in today's sort of narrative, today's world, like, I think we've gotten very, like I said, the best stories are told amongst prosecutors and cops, when we're the only ones at the party.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes it's hard to tell stories of what really happens in a community. People just don't want to know about it. And it's interesting, we have grand jury that cycles every 2 weeks, and grand jury is the first step in the criminal justice process. So I call it sort of the tip of the iceberg. If we're going to charge a felony, we have to take a case in front of the grand jury, and they have to indict it before it even goes forward. And at the end of every 2 week process, I go in and give the grand jurors like certificates and tell them thank you for like donating their life to us for a couple of weeks, even though they're subpoenaed to be there.
Yeah.
They're voluntold. They don't really have a choice. But I go in and give them certificates that I signed, which they get way more excited about than any human should be. But they always say to me, gosh, I had no idea like what happens in my community. I had no idea that these things happen. Because I hear it like every 15 minutes, every half an hour, they have a new case and a new terrible thing. Yeah. Right. And I always say to them, well, you're welcome. Like that, if you don't know what's happening, if this was completely news to you that this kind of stuff happens in your community, that's because law enforcement, police officers out there are doing their job. And I'm doing my job. My office is doing my job. It's our job to kind of be that safety net between what you don't want to know about and what's actually going on and what you do know about and how you do feel. And most people feel pretty safe in their communities. You want to live, you guys know this, in real estate, like you want to live in communities that are safe to work, raise your family, go to the park, go to school, all of those things. And so most people have no idea what actually happens. And that's because law enforcement is really serving the community as that line in between. So like I said, most of the stories that I have are not things that anybody wants to hear. But I when I have to go talk to community groups and I have this PowerPoint that I tell, and Skipper knows this. I did a cold case a few years ago with a detective from the state police, Steve Hinkle. And that case got Steve and I on Cold Case Files, like that actual TV show, like we're on Netflix. And I always tell people there's cool stuff that comes of that, right? And it was a cold case. It was a homicide out of what used to be Fairview, which was a school for sort of those folks with either mental issues or disabilities that put them there. And there was a young girl that was murdered when she was at Fairview like 38 years ago. And Steve Hinkle solved it, 30 years later.
Wow.
And so that's really cool. And it got us both on Netflix Cold Case Files. And I always say you're not a real prosecutor until you've been on one of those shows. So I can
you're there. Check that box.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you're actually on a Netflix show. How did you not tell me this?
I am me and Hinkle. How do you not know that Hinkle is
I don't know.
Me?
Yeah.
So, and for Cody's information, Steve Hinkle, one of the best detectives I've ever worked with. If I'm ever murdered, I want Steve Hinkle investigating my murder. Also, one of the funniest, most inappropriate humans on the face of the planet. So
I love it.
Yeah, the reason I even got that case is back in the day when I was OSP's personal prosecutor most of the time, and Steve Hinkle would come into my office on something else. And Steve, again, one of those detectives, so funny and so hilarious, but so inappropriate. But if he comes in to talk to you, you're going to be like, settle back. You're going to be there for like 2 hours having a conversation. And so I would just settle in and Hinkle was like, I got this crazy cold case. I think I'm going to solve it.
That's awesome.
Got solved with DNA. Yeah, it was nuts.
Wow,
so
that's really
it was
cool.
Fun. So there's stuff like that happens, right? Yeah. And I guess when you ask about impactful stuff, it's always cases where it's always victim stuff, right? Where you're bringing sort of, I never use the word closure because that's not real in criminal cases, but where you're bringing some sort of answers to a family and you give them a moment where they can move past that. And so that's always been impactful. And it's part of the reason I was attracted to the work. When I was young, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted a job that made a difference. And to me, what that meant was I knew I wanted a career where I thought about it when I wasn't at work. Like it mattered enough that like it still was something I had to work on at home. Like in my little head as a young kid, I thought, if you're doing homework, it's important. And man, I got that. I mean, I've spent 25 years pretty much always at work.
That's interesting.
always thinking about it. Always
That's
worried.
crazy you say that though, because you hear a lot of people that get into jobs solely for the base of I want to check out at 5, and be done at 5, and I don't want to think twice about it. So it's interesting that you, at such a young age, decided I want a job that I always think about.
And I think what I translated that to was it's important. Right. Like I wanted a job that was important, that made a difference. And I will tell you, like as a boss now, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I have, running an office full of younger lawyers. I mean, I'm the old lady now in the group. And I do think a lot of people are looking for that. They're looking for something, that I think is a myth. I don't think work-life balance is a thing. Not when you're doing this kind of work. I think that what I tell young lawyers when they say they want work-life balance, because first I say, what is that? Like, what does that mean to you?
Explain to me what that is, because I don't know.
Explain to me what that is, because I don't understand.
I hear about it all the time.
I hear these words. I need you to define it. But I respect that people are seeing that. I do think it's a myth, and I think if you go into a career that matters and you're expecting to always feel balanced, I think you'll be disappointed 90% of the time. I think if you're doing the job right, if you're whatever job it is, but if it's a career and you pick it and you choose it and you go in with intention, it should matter to you that doing a good job, it means you're thinking about it, means you're concerned about it. And when you're doing work like law enforcement and you have other people's lives sort of in your purview, I think it's unrealistic to think that you're going to feel balanced all the time. And what I tell younger lawyers is, I said, kind of get rid of that balance idea. You're always going to be out of balance. And I don't think of it as balance. I think of it more like a teeter-totter. Like I think sometimes, I have 4 kids. Like sometimes I'm a kick-ass mom and sometimes I'm a kick-ass prosecutor. Those are very rarely happening at the same time. And I have to be okay with that, right? I have to be okay with the fact that my kids are probably going to need therapy, because I wasn't there. But I also
that's not just because you're DA. That's because of a lot of other
it's just
reasons.
because I'm inappropriate and a terrible parent. Right. But I also think that like my kids like get it. Like I think it's important for kids to understand that what their parents do is important. And see that modeled and see that they care about it. And I think that as they've gotten older, I have all emerging adults now. My youngest is 16. I think they get. And probably forgive me for a lot of it, but I think they get that what I did was important. And so, and I did my very, very best to get to everything and be everywhere and volunteer in the kindergarten class, which taught me I never want to be a kindergarten teacher.
I tell you what.
No, but I did my very best, but I always feel a little bit out of balance, a little bit like, and you just kind of get used to it. My husband calls it voltage, which I think is a very law enforcement word. He just says that, sometimes we don't appreciate the voltage that we work at until you're out, until you're unplugged. And I just think in our work, we don't unplug very much. I'll do that when I retire. I'll unplug and feel the voltage.
I know exactly what that is, being out from the outside, just hearing your stories and hearing that, it just puts me back in there. And I've had the ability to move out and see that. And it's definitely true. It's definitely true.
And do you feel different?
Yes, very much so. It took time to get out, but I did a nice transition out of police work. I went heavy on patrol, then major crimes, which was heavy, and then dignitary protection, which was very not copish, and then went into real estate. So I was able to turn it down as I went through to the end. Whereas I think a lot of people struggle with that. Going hard and then just pulling the plug right away. And that's why a lot of cops have health issues and things after they leave. Because I think you're right.
And I think in law enforcement too, you just like, everything is like the next call and the next thing and the next case and the next, and you don't really deal with anything until the voltage is gone entirely. And so but I mean, 25 years at this voltage, I think I'm pretty used to it. So
it's just such a unique way to think about it, Paige. Like I just, I hear getting into business, you hear all the people, all the big wigs, all the people that are trying to clickbait and all that stuff of like talking about, this healthy work-life balance and all this stuff. And you just have such a unique perspective and done very well at it, living at that high range where you're like, there is no balance. And I do think as a business owner, and Cody's the same, is like, you can't, there is no turning it off. Like you can turn it, like in my industry, you can turn it down a little bit, but it's always going. There's always something to do. Like I know it's different.
That's because like it's important, right?
Yes,
and you value it. And I think, I used to tell people, like cops, I used to train cops what to do, to testify in court, right? I'd go to the police academy, and it used to be one of the classes I would teach all the time. Or I tell this to young prosecutors as they're starting, like that say that they're nervous about it, or they're worried about testifying, or they're worried about that trial. And I always say that's good. Like you should be nervous. If you're a little bit nervous, that just means that you care about what you're about to do. And you should be a little bit concerned. The minute you aren't anymore is probably the minute that once that apathy sets in, you shouldn't be doing it anymore. Yeah. Like that's not, and I think that applies to everything. I've never been in real estate, but I think that applies to anything. I think you should care about what you're doing. And I think it should make you, at least motivate you, those nerves or that anxiousness or whatever you call it. Mm-hmm. I think it should motivate you to be better. Like you should always feel a little bit like you're a little bit worried about what might happen next. Cause I think that makes you good. Yeah. I think that means you care.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you mentioned something earlier too about looking at it as a career. And I think that there's a lot of people that whatever the job is that they're doing, it's a job, and maybe it kind of slowly turns into a career, but it's not viewed in the moment of like, this is my career. This is what I'm going to do. I have to do a good job because, like for Joe and I, we're more or less I'm not technically self-employed, but like I have to bring in my own business. We have to do all these things. So the way that we do things is how people view us. And if we're not doing a good job, we're not going to bring in more business. And if you look at it as a job, then it's like, you're going to get beat down and burn out so quick because it's like, this sucks. There are times where it just is tough, like every job is. But if you have the career outlook, like this is what I'm going to do. This is a season. This is a rough patch. You also get to enjoy the good side of it. So it's refreshing to hear that perspective because I don't think that's viewed as much anymore. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this. I mean, I know that's how I was before I got into the business. It was like, I'm going to do a job that pays me money and I don't really care what it is. And if I work it for 6 months, great. If I work it for 2 years, great. But I never had anything I feel like I fell into it and then go, oh, wow, I think this is my career now. But it's cool that you've had that passion for so long.
I think when you hit it, right? Like I think some of us find sort of our intention earlier. Some of us take a little bit longer to get there. But I think once you find it, it needs to be intentional. Like I think you do have to treat it with intention, and you have to treat it like a career. You have to treat it like an arc. Like you're headed towards something, not that it is just okay for now. And I will say that's one of my challenges of being a boss of sort of a younger generation, like I said, of people is I do think there is an outlook right now of sort of like, oh, this is okay for now. And when I started, again, a quarter of a century ago, when I stepped off the Titanic, I really didn't ever think I was going to leave it. And I worked with a lot of other people who were what we call career prosecutors. They were in it for their career, and saw it as a calling. And I know that sounds so cheesy. That sounds so dumb, but I always tell people, like, if you can do this work, like if you can go to a murder scene, if you can handle a child abuse case and work with a child on the stand who's telling strangers the worst thing that has ever happened to them in their entire life, something that has altered the trajectory of their entire life. If you can do that and you can go home and you can come back tomorrow and do it all over again, like this is not a job. Like this is something that this is a career and it is a calling. Like you have an obligation to do it, because most people who do what we do, most people don't want to do what we do. They can't. And it's not in them. And I always tell people that I've always felt that I had an obligation to be here because I can. I can get up every day. It might be that I'm dead inside. Skipper would probably say that. It might be that I'm heartless. That might be real. But I don't think so. I just think it's that that my heart can take it. And so I can keep doing it. And I think when you find that, when it does become more than a job. It's a career, it's a calling, whatever it is for you. But if you can keep doing it every day and still feel motivated by it, then you have an obligation to do it, and you should do it well.
So on that note, like with the younger generation and with the controversy with law enforcement and law enforcement in general, are you seeing what's the trajectory or the trend that you're seeing with lawyers coming into a DA's office versus getting into law in general for one, and then getting into specifically law enforcement, or your side of things?
I mean, it's different, and I never sugarcoat it. The last 4 years, it was rough on law enforcement. It was, it's not fair. I wouldn't have devoted a career to, a lifetime to this. I wouldn't have stayed in something where I didn't feel like I worked with police officers, public safety professionals that like care about their community and are doing it for the right reason every single day. And so the last few years, I would say, George Floyd and post, right? It's been rough. It's been rough on law enforcement too. I think they were very unfairly, and I'll put even we in that category. I think prosecutors too sort of lumped in a category that is just not consistent with what I have seen my entire career. And and I always say that it was the first time in my career where cognitive dissonance was a real thing. Where I know that happened, right? I know that George Floyd was murdered. There is no question about that. We all watched it, right? Like you can see it happen. I know that there are stories of horrible outcomes and horrible things that happen both in law enforcement and with prosecutors across the United States. I just personally, that has not been my experience. And so there was a definite cognitive dissonance, right? Of I know it's happening out there. I know it's true. I believe those stories to be accurate. It is just not my experience in Marion County, Oregon, and how law enforcement reacts, how they treat other humans. It's just not been what I've seen. So it was rough. That was a rough few years. What I have seen, I think, as a sort of a natural outgrowth of that is as leaders, as we're trying to hire and trying to get new people to come in, it definitely had an impact on who we were seeing apply. When I started in this career, I competed with 50 other people to get my job, and now for one opening, we're lucky if we have 4 applicants.
Really?
Yeah, it's getting better.
Wow.
And I'm seeing a difference. I think the pandemic played a definite role in all of that, just like it did with everybody, right? It was a confluence, a perfect storm of a lot of things happening in law enforcement at the same time. But we've seen that. We've seen that happen. But it's getting better. And I think people are starting to figure out that. I think we're seeing it in Oregon. I think we saw it with this last election, not to get political about that, but I think we're seeing Oregonians realize that, oh, wait a minute, we need law enforcement. We need good humans to do this job, and we need people to want to be here. So I think we're seeing more people interested in the career, in the good that we do. So, yeah.
Well, that's good, because I don't see a situation where lack of law enforcement is good in any way. I mean,
yeah, and I think to the extent that Portland has been a bit of a petri dish for those ideas. I think we're seeing that. I know you all in real estate probably see it, right? It matters. You want safe communities, and you need real professionals and people who care about their communities doing this work to make it happen correctly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Joe's back. We lost him there. For a second.
We lost him. I'm just hanging out.
No, I didn't even get to the good Joe Skipper stories.
Right. We'll do that off air. Let's do that.
He was a legit detective. I don't know if he tells people about that, but
we all question it, but
I know it doesn't make sense, but Joe was a loss to doing actual. Once you went to dignitary protection, that was
sorry, little technical difficulties, but I did hear you the whole time. I just kind of had to step out. No, I'm just kidding. Little technical difficulties. Well, Paige, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for being with us. I have so many more questions, but they probably have to be asked offline since you're a public official. So